Hi, I'm National Master Dan Heisman, and I welcome you to the Chess Improver Club videos on chess improvement. These are the introductory videos about some of the things that you need to do to improve at chess. We're going to have a 3-video set. In the first video, we're going to overview what are some of the things that you need to do to improve. In the second video, we're going to address the 3 main areas you want to be fundamentally sound. And in the third video, we're going to talk about the 4 homeworks, and I'll get into a little bit more of that in a minute. When you're doing chess and you're trying to get better, there are 3 main activities that you want to do. The first one is to play, and that includes both slow games and fast games. You want to do both. The second is to study puzzles, to study annotated games, to read what I call talkie books, which are not necessarily game or puzzle books. And the third one, which is the one that's most often overlooked, is to get improvement, to get feedback on your improvement. What is feedback? Well, feedback can be going to a database and looking up your openings. Feedback can be going over the game with your opponent. Feedback can be going over your game with a strong player. Feedback can be having the engine tell you what tactics you missed. Feedback could be your coach telling you, oh, you're so worried about doubled pawns, but doubled pawns are not that big a deal. You're overemphasizing doubled pawns. A lot of times it's perfectly good to get doubled pawns if other things happen, and you're removing some of the misconceptions that you have. So you have the study, play, get feedback. So I call these 3 things the chess improvement triangle. You're always doing the little triangle. You're playing, studying, get feedback, play, get feedback, study. You want that triangle to keep moving around and around and around and around. Play, get feedback, and study. And if you omit one of those, it doesn't work. It's like being in school. Let's say you omitted feedback when you went to school. That meant they would never go over your homework with you. They would never answer your questions. They'd never give back your tests. They wouldn't even give you your grades, because that would be a form of feedback. So school wouldn't work without feedback, and neither does chess improvement. So you always want to keep that feedback going. And whether it's using a database or a video or an opening book or an engine or a strong player or even just your opponent, you want to keep getting feedback on what you're doing so that you can make sure you're going in the right direction. Okay, so as we said, they're called the improvement feedback loop. You want to keep that loop moving. Another issue of the feedback improvement loop is that you want to add positives and subtract negatives. Adding positives is what most people normally do. They learn a new opening, they learn a new exact endgame, the Lucena or the Philidor endgame. They learn a new principle. For instance, they learn a principle that rooks belong on open files, or they learn a principle that you can't attack where you don't have the advantage. There's a million different principles that you can have. But there's also taking away misconceptions. For instance, suppose you think that knights are always worth exactly 3 pawns and bishops are always worth exactly 3 and rooks are 5 and pawns are 1, so that whenever you trade, give up a bishop and a knight for a rook and a pawn, you think that's a fair trade. And it turns out that almost all the time, it's much better to give up a rook and a pawn for a bishop and a knight. You don't want to give up the bishop and the knight for the rook and the pawn, because the bishop and the knight are actually, in general, on average, worth more than a rook and a pawn, even though those basic 1, 3, 3, 5, 9 values would tell you that they're the same. So when you learn that, you're fixing a misconception that you have. Or the misconception could be what we talked about earlier with doubled pawns, where when you have the double pawns, you think, oh, that's a disaster, I can't do that. When in fact, in the position that you're looking at, maybe double pawns are not much of a negative at all, and maybe they even could be a positive. So removing misconceptions is important. So you want to add the positives when you're studying, learning new patterns, learning new principles, learning new openings, learning new endgames, adding, and then you want to subtract negatives. You want to add positives, subtract negatives. Just again, like getting better at chess is a lot like going through school, except in school, they're kind of doing this for you because the teachers have a program where you do. While when you're in chess, people are more on their own, and they're helped by their coaches, but you want to progress in the same kind of way. Okay, now, once we're talking about ways of improving, there's basically 2 big areas, and then there's a whole bunch of maybe slightly smaller areas. The 2 biggest ways to get better are to make better moves, but we're looking at the two ways to make them. The first way to make better moves is to memorize them. What do I mean by that? When you memorize knowledge, you're learning an opening sequence, which we call a tabiyah, standard opening moves in an opening. You could learn an opening, you could learn that exact end game, you can learn a principle, you can add knowledge, you can add patterns, you could study and say, oh, in this pawn structure, I want to put my pieces here. Or when I see that his king and his queen are lined up with that, I look if I can get a rook on the same line. You know, that's learning the patterns and adding positives so that you can recognize things and use your knowledge to make better moves. But in most positions, there's not things that you can recognize. You're not always in a book opening. You're not always in an exact book endgame. You're usually in some position in between where you've never seen it before, and you can't really rely on your knowledge that much to find a better move. So in this case, you can't know a better move. You have to find it. And now we're talking about skills like analysis and evaluation. Analysis is kind of like creating that tree in your head where, you know, if I go here and he goes there and I go here, what's going to happen? So that's analysis. And when you get to the quiescent nodes in the analysis on the tree where not much is happening, then you can do what's called evaluation. Evaluation is determining who stands better, how much better, and why. If you're given the position to an engine, the engine's going to give you a number like plus 0.37. Well, that's telling you, if it's plus, that white is better. 0.37 at least used to be 37 hundredths of a pawn better. And as that number gets larger and larger, white's advantage gets more and more. When you're playing, you don't have those numbers like the computer does. You just look at the board and you say, white's a little better, white's a lot better. Oh, now white's winning. Oh, white's winning easily. That kind of thing. That's evaluation. So the two main things, again, for making better moves are memorizing better moves like openings and end games and tactical patterns, but also improving your analysis and your evaluation. The second one, improving your analysis and your evaluation, is the bigger of the two because there's more positions where you don't know what to do and you have to analyze them and evaluate them. Then there are positions where you can just say, oh, next game I have to go back to the database and learn another move in that opening. That's only going to take you for the first few moves of the game. And maybe when you get to the end game, you're going to say, oh, I know this end game. I know how to mate with a king and a queen against a king, or how to mate with two bishops against a king, or how to win a Lucena position, or whatever it is. Then those things are going to be doing the figuring out a better move by finding it as opposed to just already knowing it. So finding it, making a better move is broken down into the two categories of knowing better moves by memorization versus improving your analysis, improving your evaluation capabilities so that you can find better moves. Now, is that all there is about making better moves? Making better moves? And the answer is no. There's other issues involved too. There's other dimensions. Serious chess is played with a clock. If you're playing a correspondence game, or as they call it on chess.com, a daily game, then you might have 24 hours or 72 hours to make a move. But normally you're playing a game where you have, 30 minutes to play the whole game. Or if you're playing a serious tournament, you might have 90 minutes to make 40 moves with a 30-second increment. Or if you're playing a rapid game, you might have 20 minutes with a 5-second increment. Or if you're playing a blitz game, it could be 5 minutes with a 2-second increment. Or if you're playing a bullet game, 2 minutes with a 0-second increment. You're always playing with a clock. Clocks are a very important part of chess. A lot of beginners, when they first start playing, think, oh, the clock's just kind of there. But actually, when you're playing with a clock, your time management is really important. And we're going to talk more about time management in the second video. But one of the things you can do to become better at chess is to manage your time better and learn how to pace yourself at these different time limits and how to play, different types of moves, recognize critical positions, this kind of thing. So if you improve your time management, this often makes you a better player, even if your analysis and your evaluation and your knowledge don't change that much, because a lot of people play a little bit too fast or a little bit too slow or even a lot too fast or a lot too slow. And if they slow down or speed up, then they will get a lot better. Excuse me. Give Dan a chance to edit the video. Okay, so we've talked about making better moves by adding knowledge. We've talked about it by improving your analysis and your evaluation. We've talked about improving your time management. But there's other issues that are important too. For instance, one of the big issues I see with my students is consistency. People don't do the same thing move after move. They lose their concentration. They get impatient. A lot of reasons could cause you to be inconsistent. But one thing I see in better players compared to lower players is better players are consistent. They're doing the same things move after move after move. That doesn't mean they take the same amount of time. If they have a forced move, they might move it really quickly. If they have a critical move that's really complicated, they might take 20 minutes if it's a slow game. But they're going to be consistent. They're going to not say, oh, I forgot to check if my move is safe, or I forgot to see what my opponent was doing, or I forgot to look for a better move, or whatever it is. You want to be consistent. Suppose you're playing a game and you have 40 moves in the game, and you do good things for 95% of the moves. Well, that's only 38 out of 40 is 95%. But 38 out of 40 means there's 2 moves of the game where you're not consistent, or you're not taking your time, or you're not being safe. Well, how many bad moves does it take to lose a game? It only takes 1. If you have 2 terrible moves in a game, then you're going to be a lot lower. So for instance, suppose your normal rating is 13 or 1400, but you could play like a 1700 for 38 moves of the game. But on the other 2 moves of the game, you play like an 800 player. Well, we can't add up 38 1700s and add 2 800s and then divide by 40 to get your playing strength, because those 2 really bad moves tremendously draw you back down for how good you are. So if you're not consistent and you're not doing the things that you're supposed to, and even if you let down for a couple moves of the game, whether it be because you played too slow and you ran out of time and then you couldn't do things, or you just forgot, or you got impatient, or you got excited and you thought you saw a win, so you played the move real fast and then you realized it was a terrible mistake. All of those kind of mistakes can cost you dearly hundreds of rating points. I always tell people, suppose you think openings are super important and you want to learn the Caro-Can, but you're not very good at it, and your rating is like 1300. And I say to you, rather than giving you a course on the Caro-Can, I'm going to give you a pill where you can eat this pill and you're going to memorize an entire book on the Caro-Can. What would your 1300 rating be after you take that pill? Well, it's not going to change a lot. Why? Because if you take that pill, it'll only help you when you're playing black against e4. It'll help you if your opponent plays e4 and you play the Caro-Can. If they play d4, or if they play c4 or knight f3 or something else, it doesn't help you. Also, if you're playing someone who's very weak, then they're not going to even know any of the book moves that you just studied, and they're going to start playing crazy moves on move 2, 3, and 4, and most of the stuff you studied in the book you're not going to get to anyway. And of course, if you're playing white, it's not going to help you that much, because unless you're an e4 player and your opponent chooses to play the Caro-Can, then the stuff you read in the book is only going to help you when you're playing black and not when you're white. And of course, let's say before you read the book you knew 3 or 4 Caro-Can moves, and you could play like a super engine 3600 for 4 moves. And now that you've memorized the book, you could play like 9 or 10 moves if your opponent actually keeps you in the book. Well, that's great. That means you could play like a 3600 for 10 moves instead of 4, which is actually a lot better, right? But what happens on the next 30 moves? Let's say the game's 40 moves, and all of a sudden you start playing like a 1300. Well, if you play like a 1300 for 30 moves and play like a 3600 for the first 10, it's not going to be a lot different than if you play like a 3600 for the first 4 and then play like a 1300 for the next 36. So my guess is if you ate that pill on the Caro-Can, your rating is going to go up maybe, 40 points, 50 points, 30 points, who knows. But, it's not going to take you from 1300 to 2000 by memorizing a book on the Caro-Can. And of course, most people can't even come close to memorizing an entire book of, when you test people on how much they learn from reading a book like that, it turns out to be actually a very small percentage. So those aren't the things that are going to make you a lot better, is like memorizing a bunch more opening lines. Does that mean you shouldn't study openings? Well, of course not. Of course you should, but consistency is very important. If you can do things throughout the game, that's another trait. Now, is that the only other trait that we're going to talk about? No, let's talk about some more. Let's talk about stamina. You know, chess is a game where you have to concentrate. It's like taking final exams. You have to concentrate for a long time. If you're playing one fast game, well, then you don't need too much stamina. But if you're playing a series of rapid games, or if you're playing a couple slow games in a day, you go to a chess tournament and they have a game where you have, 90 minutes for the game at 11 o'clock. And then when you finish that, you come back after lunch and you play another game at, 4 o'clock for another 90-minute game, which could take, 3 or 4 hours, depending on the increment. Then stamina becomes an issue. And if you're doing that over multiple days, stamina becomes a big issue. It's one reason why, of several, why younger players do better than older players, because older players start to lose a lot of their stamina, and it's harder for them to play those longer events and the longer games consistently. So stamina becomes a big thing. What else? Perseverance. Everybody who's watching this video probably has determination. Determination is like that will to get better, but perseverance is actually probably more important. Perseverance means you keep at it. It's sort of like the famous tale of the tortoise and the hare, where you want to be more like the tortoise than the hare. You want to keep at it. You want to keep doing things, and you're going to get into slumps, you're going to get into ruts. But if you do the right things, you have good coaches, you keep going back to events, and you keep practicing, you're talking to your opponents, you're doing all the things we're going to be talking about in the other videos a little bit, and they're going to talk about in the Chess Improver Club overall. If you're doing the things that the Improver Club wants you to do, then you should be able to eventually get out of ruts, get out of slumps, and still manage to do some improvement. Are you going to improve forever? No, everybody has a limit. Not everybody can be a professional chess player. Not everybody can quit their job and play full time. But that doesn't mean you can't get a lot better, and you can get a lot better at a lot of ages. I heard a story about a 90-year-old who took up chess because he wanted to have a mental activity, and his first rating was around 900, but by the time he was 93 years old, he got up to 12 or 1300. So he improved a lot. Now, if Magnus Carlsen gets to 90 years old, he's not going to be better at 93, because he's going to be getting older, and his brain's going to be getting slower. But if you've never learned anything and you're 90 years old, that's a whole different ballgame. Then as you learn things that you never knew, you can get to be better at 91 and 92 years old than you were at 90. That's an extreme case, of course, but I'm just trying to make the point. All right, so perseverance, keeping at things. Also, there's your ability to learn from games and losses, your ability to read over annotated games and apply what you're learning there to your game. Even if it's not the same opening that you played, you could learn a lot about how to play these kind of pawn structures, or how to recognize these kind of tactics or positional ideas, or learn principles. You have to be able to learn from your losses. A lot of people, when they lose a game, they don't want to look at it. They get so disgusted with themselves. But of course, you learn a lot from all kinds of games that you play. You learn a lot from your wins. You learn a lot from your draws. You learn a lot from your losses. About the only games you don't learn from is if your opponent falls into an opening trap and resigns, and you say, oh yeah, on move 6 you can't do that because I just go over here and I win your knight, and then you resigned, and you knew that already, you probably don't learn anything. But from almost any other game, you're going to learn a lot from it, whether you won, you lost, or you drew. But a lot of people don't want to learn from their games as much, especially the games that they lost, because it's too painful. But that ability to learn from your losses is another trait that's important. The final thing I want to talk about in terms of sub-ways to improve are coachability. Do you fight the coach when the coach tells you something? Do you get upset with him? Or one of the things I tell people is, when I coached Howard Stern, the radio personality, he always assumed I was on his side. And even if I said something wrong, it came out of my mouth wrong, he never got upset with me. He always knew my goal was to help him as much as I could. And we never really, in the several years that I taught Howard, 5.5 years, we never really got into any arguments. Nobody got upset with the other person. He knew I was always trying to help him. And, everything that we did was kind of in a positive manner. So he had great coachability. All right, I'm just going to quickly overview the next two videos, and then we'll do them. In the second video, we're going to talk about the 3 main areas you want to become fundamentally sound. The first is the safety of your moves and the safety of your opponent's moves. If they're not safe, we call that tactics. The second thing is the activity of your pieces, the mobility and their coordination and so on. And the third thing is getting more into time management. In the third video, we're going to talk about the 4 homeworks and the types of the different patterns within the game. We're going to talk about openings, middle game, end game. The 4 homeworks are going to include playing slow games augmented by fast games. You're going to read instructive anthology game books where the author is trying to make you better, as opposed to, let's say, Karpov's Best Games, where they're just trying to show you what Karpov was doing. You're going to do appropriate puzzles. That would start with repetitious, easy puzzles, so you learn how to recognize the patterns. But then also you're going to do positional puzzles, you're going to do planning puzzles, and eventually you'll be doing more higher level tactical puzzles. And finally, any other homework you have, which would be like watching this video or reading those talkie books we talked about earlier, listening to Dan Lona's podcast, those kind of things. Those are the fourth and other homeworks. So that's what we'll do in the last video. All right, thanks a lot for watching this video for the Chess Improver Club, and you can tune in and watch the second and third videos in the series. Thanks. Bye.